Episode 40, The Four Tendencies with Gretchen Rubin. Welcome back, everyone. I am your host, Chase Chewning, and this is your weekly source for inspiring content from people who are putting a purpose to their passion and truly living a life ever forward. This is Ever Forward Radio. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode. Welcome back to another week. Welcome back to another insight and resource to help fuel your fire, to help ignite and add a purpose to your passion. At least that's what I hope this content does for you, and that's what I hope the message behind each and every episode of Ever Forward Radio brings to you and for you. This week, we are diving into one of my favorite authors, one of my favorite guests on all of my other podcasts that I listen to. She has frequently been on Lewis Howes's The School of Greatness. She has been on a couple times over on Josh Trent's Wellness Force Radio. And I'm going to be talking with Miss Gretchen Rubin. She is out on book tour. She recently launched a new book, The Four Tendencies. And for anyone who is familiar with her work, you know that she has been dropping hints about these four tendencies and kind of talking about just different ways that people go about communicating to others, hearing others, and just going about their normal day-to-day life. And for any of you who have picked up on my reference or picked up on my recommendation of the 5 love languages, particularly how to best communicate and show up for your significant other, or for just looking to be a better person in a relationship, whether you're in one or not, I liken this book, her work about the 4 tendencies, to just general day-to-day life. It really does allow you to kind of just peel back and give an objective view into how you listen to others, how you talk to others, and how you just show up in every day-to-day experience, whether it's at the job site, in your relationships, or even just with yourself. So I really hope you stick around and listen to this episode thoroughly, and please go check out her new book, The Four Tendencies. All this information will be linked down in the show notes below. But before we dive in, I want to give a special thank you to one of our podcast sponsors, and that is Freshly. Over at Freshly.com, you can use promo code EverForward. You're going to save yourself $40 off of your entire initial order. Now, guys, I've been using Freshly for many weeks now, going on, I think, a couple months, and they reached out to me a while back about coming together and working, on promoting their product on this platform. And I'm not going to lie, I've had a lot of companies and products come to me about product placement. Hey, let's do an IG shout out. Let's talk podcast sponsorship. And I'm really particular about who I want to do business with, because usually it's people that I have supported and used their product for a long time in the past, but Freshly really stood out to me from the get-go. They weren't a just generic frozen, hey, order your food, drop it off at your door, never really know from where it's coming, but Freshly really did their homework as far as providing quality meals, fresh, never frozen. And I think particularly for my demographic, the health and wellness oriented person, a lot of their meals are going to cater to specific people. All of their food is gluten-free. You can get paleo, vegetarian. They have all of their nutrition facts on the back. And for all of my food trackers out there, all of their meals that I've had so far, you can pull them up on MyFitnessPal. So very easy to track. Go ahead and check out Freshly.com. Fresh, never frozen. All the meals are cooked in about 3 minutes, and it saves me about an hour, at least in my time, where I'm cooking lunch or dinner. So special thanks to Freshly. Ever Forward, again, $40 off your entire first order. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this week's iTunes review of the week. I've been seeing quite a few more reviews coming down the line. I appreciate it. The podcast appreciates it. The more ratings, the more reviews that you share with me, and it really does provide incredible insight and feedback. So I personally appreciate it. I know this is time out of your valuable day, and it means a lot that that you can kind of just provide this constructive criticism sometimes and positive feedback most of the time. The 5 stars also really help bring attention to the podcast. It helps it move up on the charts in iTunes so that more people who maybe aren't aware of the Ever Forward message see it. If they're interested in the health, self-help channels on iTunes, they're going to find this podcast. They're going to find this content. So this week's iTunes review comes from Anna Burrows. Anna, I recognize the name. I know you always leave me great feedback on pretty much every platform. So Thanks again for heading on over to iTunes and leaving some podcast love. Anna writes, great stuff. Chase, I really appreciate your podcast, specifically the one with Mind Pump as your guest. I appreciate the rawness of the content and really connected to the material. I'm a registered dietitian working on my master's degree and have come across a lot of BS. Really appreciate this podcast. Anna, I'm really stoked that someone else in this industry, working on your master's, a registered dietitian, specifically there's a lot of BS in this industry, fitness, wellness, health, just all of the above. There's so much information, so much misinformation. And by no means do I ever feel or hope that I come across as that I'm saying I know the end-all, be-all answers to these topics. But my goal on this podcast, my goal in just expanding my own knowledge is to just always keep an open mind and to always go back to the beginnings, the truth, the half-truths, the BS, and bring on other people that are doing the same thing. People that are going to call out others in this industry when they're doing something right and maybe when they need to get in check. So I'm glad that episode resonated with you. Stay tuned because I'm going to be working with Mind Pump hopefully in the near future. They have an amazing studio up in Northern California. The goal is by the end of the year, or maybe early 2018, I'm going to hop on a flight, go check out their studio, go do a video, audio collab, and get to know the Mind Pump guys even a little bit more. So stay tuned. More Mind Pump material coming to you soon. All right, so we're going to dive into episode 40 with Gretchen Rubin, talking all about the Four Tendencies. And before we do, I hope you guys are prepared, ready, physically, mentally, to just learn about these four tendencies, learn about these four truths, really, of how you can better yourself on a daily basis and how you show up, how you listen, and how you convey, how you communicate to others in every way possible. All right? And one of the best ways that you can show up is to just take care of yourself. And the number one way that I take care of myself every day, first thing in the morning, I'm talking about Organifi. If you've been following me for any time period, you know I just love the Super Greens product. Organifi has a myriad of other health products out there, but I, every day, cannot speak highly enough of their green juice. It is just one of the things that you take and you feel. So you know you're getting your money's worth. You know you're getting the health benefits. Every day, guys, I start my day off, I just chug a giant glass of water, head into the kitchen, mix up my green juice, down the hatch, and it just puts me in the right mindset. I feel energized. I know I'm giving my body those micronutrients, that just cellular energy that we need to start off the day. So, highly recommend you go check them out. Hop on over to Organifi.com. Off of any of their products, you can use promo code EverForward. You're going to save 20%. Personally, green juice is my go-to, my daily way to just take care of my mind, my body, to make sure that I am best showing up for anything and everything the day has to show for me, okay? So, episode 40, brought to you by Organifi. Go ahead and mix up your greens. Feel good, listen good. Let's go. But real quick, I have to give a very special thank you to Gretchen for being a trooper. We spent about a good 15, almost 20 minutes trying to just secure our connection for this interview. So let this be a lesson to all you guys. If you're doing a podcast interview or just doing anything in life, have a plan B, have a plan C. And in our case, we had to have a plan D. I don't know what was going on, but the Skype gods, the technology gods were just working against us. So apologies in advance for any technical glitches. Doing my best to make sure that this interview is as seamless as possible for the listeners. And again, Gretchen, thank you for being such a trooper. Thank you for sticking it out through these technical errors. And let's go ahead and jump into the interview. Again, apologies for any mishaps during the recording here, but nonetheless, an amazing interview and great content to take away from it. And I'm not sure how much or at all if you're familiar with the podcast, but thank you for taking the time out to just hop on and help a lowly podcaster out. So.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be joining your show.
So I've been following you and reading your content. Full disclosure, I don't have the Four Tendencies yet, but okay. I have to say through your previous books and through your previous podcasts and interviews, I feel like I definitely already know a lot of the content that I can expect to read about. I've been a big fan and follower and friend of Josh Trent over at Wellness Force Radio. And,
Oh, sure.
And I just heard your interview last week with Lewis Howes over on School of Greatness. Awesome content. So I love how you've kind of expanded upon the little hints and tips and tricks about the Four Tendencies in your previous work, and have just made it its own standalone book right now. So that's awesome.
Oh, good. Thank you. That's great to hear.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk about it, but, full disclosure, I'm definitely an upholder. I thought I was maybe an obliger in the beginning, but the more and more I kind of heard you talk about it, I really think the upholder tendency rings a little bit more true with me.
Okay, well, you and me both, man. It's the small but mighty group of upholders.
All right, so I'm joined this week with Miss Gretchen Rubin here on Everforward Radio. Gretchen, thank you for sticking with me through the technical difficulties. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm very happy to be talking to you.
So thanks to Gretchen, I've learned to not only have a plan B, but also a plan C, and technically even a plan D. I think we tried multiple different ways to connect and make this interview happen. So for those of you who don't know who Gretchen is, she is a world-renowned author, multiple New York Times best-selling author. I came across her work first with the Happiness Project and learning about and hearing her content over on, you guys have all heard me talk about Josh Trent, Wellness Force Radio, and most recently she has been on book tour. And I just heard her interview with Lewis Howes, and she is gracing us with her presence here today. And I'm really excited to have her talk about her previous work with happiness and how that kind of inspired you to create this specific map for people to figure out which one of their four tendencies. So Gretchen, if you could please give us a little intro into yourself, who you are, how you got started in this amazing work.
Well, I'm a writer mostly and also a podcaster, and I have a website where I write almost every day on my subject, which is human nature. So that's my big subject, and I particularly write about happiness, good habits, and this personality framework that you mentioned, the Four Tendencies framework, which is a personality framework that I identified. So what I'm really interested in is what are we like? Like, what are people like? Why do we do what we do? And how can we make ourselves happier, healthier, more productive, more creative? And I focus on the things that are very concrete and very kind of day to day. This is not quit your job and move to another part of the world. This isn't about a 10-day silent meditation retreat. This is like
real life characteristics.
Yeah. What are the things you can do tomorrow without a lot of extra time, energy, or money, just as part of your ordinary day that would make your life better? So that's what I write about in my books. That's what I talk about on my podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin. And that's what I write about on my website.
What was kind of your inspiration for this? Because on paper, when just kind of that brief introduction, it sounds so simple, these easy kind of tasks and characteristic evaluations, if you will, to kind of figure out who you are, why you're unhappy, how to get happier. What maybe was it for you that made you realize that you needed to find your happiness?
Well, all my books really are about human nature. And I wrote a biography of Winston Churchill. I wrote a book called Power, Money, Fame, Sex, which to some people seem very different from books about happiness. But to me, they're all very much connected. They're all about human nature. I got the specific inspiration to write the Happiness Project and just to tackle happiness from a very inconspicuous moment of my life. I was stuck on a city bus in the pouring rain, and I looked out the window and I thought, well, what do I want from my life anyway? And I thought, I want to be happy. But I realized I didn't spend any time thinking about whether I was happy or how I could be happier. I thought, I should have a happiness project. And I ran out the next day to the library and got a giant stack of books and started researching it. And the thing is, I was pretty happy when I started. And one of the things that I really wanted to get from my happiness project is I wanted to appreciate it. I knew that I was just taking my happiness for granted. And I really wanted to stop myself and appreciate and have gratitude for all the happiness that I already had. And so when I had the idea, in my mind, it was a happiness project, and it was just something I was going to do for myself. One thing that's true about me is I very often get obsessed with subjects, and I'll do a ton of research just because I feel like it. And so I was finishing my biography of JFK, and I thought, I'll just do this. I'm just interested in the subject. I'll do this research for myself. But I quickly realized that it was such a deep, limitless subject. That I was like, wow, I should have this be my next book. And really, I've been writing about it ever since then. That was, 4 or 5 books ago.
Yeah.
that's how I got into it.
How did you kind of put those parameters around such a broad topic of happiness? I feel like, we could study one particular aspect of human nature, but it sounds like you're kind of going all in, human nature overall, happiness overall. How did you kind of funnel down into one particular, ability, one particular topic to write about?
Well, that's a very good question, because I think when I was starting, I had the same feeling that you had, which is sort of like happiness feels like this very transcendent subject. It's very abstract. It's sort of like everything's tangled up with everything else. How do you even begin? Like, how do you even understand it? So that was one of the big aims of the book, The Happiness Project, was how do you even create a framework to think about it clearly? I mean, in all my books, one thing I've learned about myself sort of in hindsight is what I like to do as a writer is to take a huge subject like the life of Winston Churchill, and distill it into kind of its most interesting, useful, findings, and then deliver it in a very accessible way. And so something like happiness is a great subject for me because it is so vast and limitless, and it touches it's health, it's relationships, it's spirituality, it's the body, it's productivity, it's work, it's parenthood, it's a million different things. How do you even think about it in kind of in a clear way? And same thing with habits. Like once I started getting into habits, I was like, oh my gosh, it's just this vast, limitless trove of information pointing in all different directions.
Such a hot topic these days.
Yeah, and I like that challenge of like, okay, how could I distill this into an accessible book that like the average person could read with pleasure and learn from? And the same thing with my personality framework. It's like, oh my gosh, people are so different from each other. How do we even talk about this in a way that's useful? And I'm like, okay, let's just take one part of it and really try to understand that one thing. So I agree. These subjects do feel kind of so big you can't get your arms around them, and that's what I enjoy as a writer, is trying to do that work for the reader.
You said one word that really rings true for my profession, and definitely, technically this podcast category. We're in the health category / self-help. How can one's health make or break one's happiness?
Well, it's interesting. I think health is like money, in that it detracts from our happiness much more than it adds to it. And we all know this. It's like, and it's kind of a joke. Like, if you don't have your health, what do you have? And like, as long as you've got your health.
Your health is your wealth.
But it's really true. It's like when you have health, it's very easy to take it for granted. Just like when you have enough money to pay your bills, it's very easy to forget how happy you are to have enough money to pay your bills. So these are things which we're very aware of when we lose them or when we don't have enough of them. And so it's like you have to kind of have a gratitude practice or reminder practice of like how lucky you are. I mean, my husband just had knee surgery, and it was the most basic, common, ordinary form of knee surgery. He was like in and out of the hospital in literally 5 hours. Could not have been less of a big deal. And yet I was just like, oh my gosh, every day that you're not in a hospital is a happy day. Every day that you can walk without pain is a happy day. Every day where you can lie in your bed the way you want to lie in your bed is just a wonderful treat and a pleasure that you should never take for granted. But you have to remind yourself of that. But the physical experience always affects our emotional experience. And so I think that when I wrote the Happiness Project, the first thing I talked about was energy. Because I was like, if I have energy, everything else will be easier. And of course, energy is very tied to the physical body. Sleep, exercise, what we eat, managing pain.
This is what I love to hear. This is what I hope a lot of the listeners and my clients pick up on, and that it's not just Chase telling them, hey, you gotta build that one small snowball that is yourself, and that is your self-care and your health. Because like you just said, if you don't have that, you can't build upon that platform. You're building a house on toothpicks.
Well, and one of the things, like just to take something like sleep, often people know very well what would make them happier. They know they'd be happier if they exercised. They know they'd be happier if they like had a Super Bowl party. Mm-hmm. They know they'd be happier if they planned a picnic with their family on the weekend and got out in nature and had a little adventure. But they're so exhausted. They can't bear the thought of just the logistics involved, the errands, the emails. You're just like, oh my gosh, I can't even face it. And so you need that energy in order to do the things that will make you happier. But a lot of times things take a little bit of effort. And if you're just drained down to the very last drops, it just feels like too much. And then you can't do the things that in the end would make you happier. Because you're just too tired.
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest things that I talk about in my foundational strategizing with any consultation with any new client, or honestly just any friend or family member talking about like, hey, you health, right?
Yeah.
What's the one thing, or what's the one way in which, you start? How do you get started?
Yeah.
And I think that brings up another really good point. Maybe in your research, in your own practice, your own application, and certainly in your writings, how would you say someone could best go about going from doing, or excuse me, from knowing to doing?
Well, that's the $1,000,000 question, right?
That's why I asked it.
That's the question that has obsessed me for years. That's why I wrote Better Than Before, which is my book about habit change. It's about the 21 strategies people can use to make or break their habits. And the fact is, there is no one magic solution that works for everyone, because everybody's different. You, Chase, are different from me, Gretchen. I'm a morning person, you're a night person. I'm an abstainer, you're a moderator. I'm a finisher, you're an opener. Then the Four Tendencies. Okay, well, it's working now, so that's good.
Yeah, and I'm covering all bases. I've got about 3 different recording devices going.
Plan A, Plan B, Plan C.
Yeah, so here we go. All right, we're back again. Apologize for the delay there, Gretchen. We lost the audio connection, but we're back now. And so we were talking about action, taking someone going from knowing to doing, and how that's kind of the $1,000,000 question, and then that leads into your latest work, kind of figuring out which tendency you are. Your latest writings about the 4 tendencies. So maybe let's shift into there, talk about the 4 tendencies, and specifically how that can help someone go from knowing to doing.
Well, it was exactly this question that led me to the 4 tendencies, because I was very curious, and I would see patterns in how people could successfully make or break habits. And I was trying to figure out what was behind those patterns. What explained the way that some people responded to different situations in ways that were different from the way I would have responded to them. And so it led me to the 4 tendencies. And the 4 tendencies has to do with how you respond to an expectation. And we all face 2 kinds of expectations. Outer expectations that other people impose on us, things like a work deadline, a request from a friend. And then we have our inner expectations that we impose on ourselves. So I want to keep a New Year's resolution. I want to quit sugar. I want to get back into playing guitar. So depending on whether you meet or resist expectations that are outer or inner, you're either an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. So upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations. They meet the work deadline, they keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect from them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important.
And we were just talking about this before, that this is your tendency, this is my tendency, and how when I first came across your work, I really thought I was an obliger, because I was like, I really want to make sure I'm there for everybody, I want to uphold everybody else, I want to do everything I can for them. But at the same time, when I was reading more about specifically what an upholder is and what they do, I was like, no, actually, Chase, no, you're an upholder. Like, you have the same expectations of doing things for others as you do for yourselves. You set the same criteria, the same stringent goals and processes.
Well, it's interesting that you and I are both upholders, because it's a very small tendency. Only rebel is smaller. There are not that many people who are upholders, but we're among them. Then there are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. So they don't like anything arbitrary, inefficient, irrational. They make everything an inner expectation. If it meets their inner standard, they will meet that expectation. If it fails their standard, they will resist it. Then there are obligers. This is the largest tendency. For both men and women, this is the one that the largest number of people belong to. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And I got my insight into this tendency when a friend of mine said, the weird thing about me is I know I would be happier if I exercised. And when I was in high school, I was on the track team, and I never missed track practice. So why can't I go running now? Well, why? Same person, same behavior. One time she could do it effortlessly, now she can't do it. So now I would say, well, you're an obliger. When you had a team and a coach, no problem. When you're just trying to do it on your own, it's a struggle. And then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. If you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And typically, they don't even want to tell themselves what to do. Like, typically, they wouldn't sign up for a 10 a.m. spin class on Saturdays, because they don't know what they're going to feel like doing on Saturday. And just the idea that someone's expecting them to show up at 10 a.m. is going to annoy them.
Yeah, I can't commit to that right now. I mean, who knows what I'll be doing? That's kind of the mindset they would have, right?
All right, right. So rebel is the smallest tendency, and then upholder is only slightly larger. So those are the two kind of extreme polar fringe tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest one is obliger, and then after that, questioner. And this is something that's worth keeping in mind if you're dealing with a large team, or you're teaching a class, or you're designing a curriculum. Most people are going to be obligers and questioners, and then you're going to have the fringe rebels and upholders too.
Would you say someone could be more than one?
I would say that really people have a core tendency. You really are solidly within a tendency. But if you look at a graph of the four tendencies, you'll see that they're like four interlocking circles. And so you and I are upholders. Mm-hmm. And so upholders are like obligers, and that upholders and obligers both readily meet outer expectations. But upholders are also like questioners, because like questioners, upholders also readily meet inner expectations.
Okay.
So you can tip one direction or another. So, you can kind of be an upholder who veers more towards obliger, or an upholder who veers more towards questioner. So say in my case, I'm an upholder who tips to questioner, and my husband is a questioner who tips to upholder. So we're in different tendencies, but I think it's kind of an easy match because we're pretty close to each other as these things overlap. I do think people are within a core tendency, but it can take on a very different flavor depending on which way you're tipping.
So this is all well and good, and in my experience, it kind of resembles what some people could call like a personality test. So once we go through reading this content, looking at these four tendencies, once someone can kind of put a label to what they recognize, what jumps out on the paper as themselves, what does that mean? How does that translate into action? What does me knowing I'm an upholder, what does that really mean?
Right, exactly. That's the key question is like, what difference does it make?
Yeah.
And I should also say, most people can tell what they are from a brief description, but you can take a quiz at happiercast.com/quiz, and more than 1 million people have taken the quiz. So, so take the quiz, and you'll get a little report also. But to your question, so why does it matter? So it matters in two ways. One is that it matters in managing yourself. If you're like, well, I'm so frustrated because I know that I want to quit sugar, so why can't I? Knowing your tendency is going to give you a lot of powerful tools in how to harness the strengths of your tendency and how to offset the weaknesses of your tendency in order to achieve that aim.
Okay.
And also, if you're trying to deal with somebody else, if you're trying to get somebody else to do what you want, or to help them do what they want, you're a doctor trying to get someone to take their medication. You're a teacher trying to help a child graduate from high school. You're a spouse that's trying to get your spouse to like clean out the garage. A lot of times we're trying to persuade other people to do things. When you know someone's tendency, then it's a lot easier to communicate with them in a way that's going to be effective. Because what most people do is like, I'm an upholder, and so I would talk to other people as if they were upholders. And Chase, I'm sure you would agree with me. The fact is, most people are not upholders. And a lot of things that work for upholders don't work for other people. This is like the truth of being an upholder.
Yeah.
So once you understand, like, well, people need different things in order to get where they're going. Okay, that's fine. It's not that one person's right and one person's wrong. It's just how can we all get where we're trying to go.
And I'm glad you brought up this concept of how it can not only change your perspective, but how it should change your perspective when engaging and communicating with other people. And this particular concept really reminded me of, you're familiar with the 5 love languages?
Yes.
This was just like, I read that years ago, and for my own personal growth and relationship growth, because it really just showed me, okay, actually this is the best way that you give and want to receive love and affection, and insert any type of positive relationship aspect here. This really kind of rings true in the same way of outside of that romance or intimate relationship component. This is just like your premise. It's all human nature. It's all ways to better understand why you do things, how you do things, and then how to engage others in their best tendency.
Yeah, and one of the things, I think the 5 love languages is a good analogy. And one of the things that happens is that you see how something that could work really, really well for one person might actually be counterproductive for another person. So I think a lot of times people are trying to figure out, well, what's the best way? What's going to work for everyone? Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't work on you, well, there's something wrong with you. Well, you don't have willpower. You don't have self-control. You can't put yourself first. You're not listening to me. It doesn't really matter to you. It's not really a priority. And it's like, no. It's not that. It's that you just need things set up. So, for instance, if we're obligers to meet inner expectations.
Okay.
They have to have outer accountability. That is just what is needed. If you want to read a book as an obliger, join a book group. If you want to exercise, work out with a trainer, take a class where they take attendance and they charge you even if you don't show up, work out with a friend who's going to be annoyed if you don't come, think of your duty to be a role model for other people, on and on and on. There's a million ways to plug in outer accountability. Once you realize that for an obliger, that is what is needed. And obligers will sometimes say that they're lazy, or they'll say that they're people pleasers, or that they can't put themselves first. And I'm like, wipe all that away. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. What matters is outer accountability. Once you have that outer accountability, you will be able to follow through. And also with obligers, if I say, look at your past and when you've succeeded and failed in the past, and you will see that it's when you have accountability that you can do these things. However, if you've got a rebel, that accountability might make them want to resist. They don't want you to tell them what to do. They want to choose what they do. They want to do what they want to do. And if I feel like somebody's looking over their shoulder or keeping track of what they're doing or expecting them to show up at a certain place at a certain time, that actually might make them resist. So they might exercise less if they feel like you're always looking at them and holding them accountable than if you were like, hey man, exercise if you want. Like I always think of you as like an athletic, energetic person. So like, you seem like the kind of guy who'd go to the gym all the time, but whatever.
I can think
and then
of
they're like,
people.
Yes, I am a strong, energetic. I am the kind of person that goes to the gym all the time. I feel like going to the gym. I want to go to the gym, but I'm not going because you're telling me to go to the gym. So it's sort of like what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for everybody.
Once we know this, specifically, I keep going back to when you talk about the rebel, like on paper, this sounds like the type of person that would just be, maybe I'm assuming here, self-centered, rude, only caring about themselves. Is that how it kind of translates, or is this just a difference in how they best operate?
So that is a very, very important question. And one of the things that people often do with personality frameworks is in my view, they try to explain too much. So they say, well, I'm going to paint a whole picture of you. And sometimes people do say that with the rebel. They're like, they're unconventional, or they're narcissistic, or they're creative. And here's the thing. Yeah. All that the tendencies tell you is how a person responds to expectations. So you and I are upholders. Mm-hmm. We could line up 50 upholders or 50 questioners, 50 rebels. And depending on how considerate of other people's feelings they are, what their values are, how intellectual they are, how curious they are, how extroverted or introverted they are, how adventurous they are, how controlling they are, how neurotic they are. All these things would build a completely different person. But as to one thing, they would all be the same. If you've got 50 questioners lined up, they're all going to look completely different from each other. But if we ask or tell them to do something, they're all going to say, why should I? That is what makes a person a questioner. So some rebels are very narcissistic and self-centered, but some are extremely idealistic and very, very considerate of others, and very ambitious. Or rebels can do anything they want to do. They can live up to their identity. So if their identity is that they're a very kind of responsible, considerate person who wants to be respected and to be contribute positively to their community, they can do that, and they can do anything they want to do. If they don't want to, they won't. So rebels can look very, very different from each other. Some rebels would be great to have around. Some rebels are more of a challenge.
What would you say would be the best combination for someone in a friendship, a work environment, a intimate relationship? What would be a definite great combo? What would be kind of you got your work cut out for you combo?
Well, again, like in a relationship or like in a career, choosing a career, so many things come into play. It's not just one factor of your personality. There's a million things that come into play. So I don't think you can say like all of this tendency should pair up with that tendency. Okay. But that said, there are a few generalizations that you can make. One is that when a rebel pairs up, either in romance or at work, like let's say you have a founding team, almost always that rebel will be paired with an obliger. That is overwhelmingly the pattern. Now, I have seen ones with questioners and upholders. It's rare. Almost always when it's a rebel, the rebel is paired up with an obliger. That's by far the stable pattern. In terms of things that don't work, the trickiest one is upholder paired with rebel. That is a very, very difficult one. They're the extreme personality types. They're exactly opposite. So I want to live up to my schedule. I want to make a to-do list. I want to meet my expectations to myself. And you want to be totally spontaneous. You want to wake up in the morning and do what you feel like. You don't feel bound to do the things that you said you would do. That doesn't really bother that yesterday you said you were going to do it. Now you don't feel like doing it. That's going to make me crazy.
Wait, Gretchen, are you talking? I think you're pretty much describing my current relationship with my wife.
Ooh, interesting.
She actually just walked in.
Is she a rebel?
Very much so. Very much so.
Ooh, well, then you really want to take take that into account when you talk to her, because with rebels, you do not want to trigger that spirit of resistance.
Oh, I take a lot into account when I talk to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I got to say, after learning more specifically about the 5 love languages and then these 4 tendencies, it really kind of helped put things into perspective, and not just how I handle conversations with my partner, but also going back to the work reference of people that I work for, people that work for me, people that are on the same level, and just really recognizing, okay, they responded this way. It doesn't really necessarily mean that they're digging their heels in, or they just really disagree with my suggestion or maybe my order, but it's this is just how they receive that information, and that's how they then kind of regurgitate it. And so I think it's definitely helped me out a lot, in personally and professionally.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, I mean, I think what you're describing is also the frustration that people sometimes feel with questioners, because questioners often drain and overwhelm others with their persistent questioning, which to the questioner seems totally appropriate and helpful. They're like, why aren't we saying, why should we do this? Why are we using this software? Why are we doing what corporate says? Why? Yeah. But what questioners need to understand, and what other people should understand about questioners, is they don't mean to be undermining authority. They don't mean to be looking like they're insubordinate, or if they're children that they're disrespectful. They just need robust explanations. And sometimes, say if you're an upholder or an obliger, you're like, why do we have to keep talking about this? Like, this is what we have to do. The whole company is switching to a different software program. Why? Like,
just accept it and move on.
They're not going to change it because you have objections. Like, let's just get on with it. Like, why all the conversation? But to a questioner, it's like, until they understand why something's going to be done, it's very hard for them to get on board. And so once you understand, this person isn't disrespecting me. They're like this with I do with my husband. It's like,
it's not just me. This is just how they are.
Like, I don't need to take it personally. He's like this with everyone. And so it might still make me kind of annoyed at times that he has all these questions before he'll do a simple thing. But now I'm like, it's not a reflection on a relationship. I don't have to, it's just the way that he is. And there's many advantages to that tendency, things that benefit me. So I should just think like, well, there's a lot of advantages, so I just have to deal with it.
Yeah, maybe talk a little bit more about the advantages. How can we have this mindset shift around looking at it, instead of them just thinking differently or acting differently from me? How can we view it, another tendency, working with them, living with them, loving them? How can we see that as an advantage?
Well, I mean, all the tendencies have their strengths are their weaknesses. I mean, the upholder's commitment to meeting outer and inner expectations is a wonderful thing. It's a great thing to have people around you who sort of can keep expectations and are self-starters and don't need a lot of supervision, or you can count on them to follow through for themselves and for others. That's great. But upholders can also seem rigid, because it's like, well, you know what? I know we've got guests coming this weekend, but I got to go on a 12-mile run because I'm training for the marathon. So I'm sorry, I'm out. I gotta, or like, I don't eat sugar, right? I'm a very low carb person, and I'm like, oh, it's your birthday and you made this cake. I'm not going to eat a piece of birthday cake because, like, I just don't eat sugar.
Yeah,
and
most
I don't
people
care.
would think that's rude, right?
They do, and they can seem rude and cold. That's something that comes with an upholder. Questioners, it's great to have this drive for efficiency and this love for research and information, but it can also be draining and overwhelming. And questioners can sometimes have analysis paralysis when they can't make decisions because they want perfect information. So you're like, we just need to pick a place to go on vacation. Where do you want to go? And they're like, but do we want someplace luxurious, or do we want to save money? Do we want to go someplace warm, or do we want to have an adventure? Do we want to go with our families, or do we want to go, and it's like, oh my gosh, okay, how do we manage that? Obligers are the rock of the world. I mean, they're the biggest tendency. You either are an obliger, you have many obligers in your life. They are the ones who come through. If upholders, questioners, or rebels need somebody to help them out, they go straight for the obliger. But obligers need outer accountability to follow through with things, and that can be frustrating to others. Like, upholders are often very puzzled by this. They're like, you keep saying this is important to you, so I don't understand why you're not doing it. It's like, why aren't you keeping your promise to yourself? Like, to us, to an upholder, that feels very, like, that makes us very uneasy. Why aren't you keeping your word to yourself? But so when you understand the tendencies, you can have more sympathy for why they're having that challenge.
That was probably one of my biggest hurdles to accept and move on with when I started this profession of being a coach. It's for me, I'm at the mentality of, okay, this is what I need to do in order to achieve this goal, so I'm just going to do it. These are the things that I have to do every day, every week, insert whatever that looks like here, whatever that plan is, And then when working with people one-on-one or with groups, it's like what don't you get about this?
Yeah.
Like, I don't
Yeah.
understand. Like, just don't do this, do that instead. But it really took me a while to effectively understand that they haven't gotten there yet. That hasn't clicked with them. The light bulb hasn't gone off yet.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I think upholders are very drawn to those kinds of roles, and they're often not very well suited in many ways to that role because things come easily to them that don't come easily to others, and they don't understand other people's point of view. Because they're like, well, like, we've talked about this 3 times. Like, what more why do we have to keep having this conversation? And you're like, and to the obliger, it's like, well, I don't know, because I really do feel committed to exercising. It's like, okay. But once you know you're dealing with an obliger, you're just like, okay, we're going to build in outer accountability. Like, that's simple once you know. And so obligers can, and the obligers have this phenomenon that everybody should be very aware of obliger rebellion, which is when they'll meet expectations. Then suddenly they snap and they're like, well, this I won't do. And sometimes it's small, like, I'm just not going to answer your emails for 2 weeks. And sometimes it's huge, like, I'm going to divorce you. I'm going to end our 20-year friendship. I'm going to quit this job because I've just had it with you people and there's no going back. And this happens when obligers feel neglected, exploited, taken advantage of, unheard, when pressure becomes just unbearable. And obliger rebellion is meant to be constructive. It's meant to blow up a situation to save an obliger from pressure that has become too burdensome.
Really?
But it sometimes can be very destructive.
It sounds like that's kind of their boiling point of going kind of full circle to your original research and writing about happiness. I'm sure once they reach this boiling point of what is being done perceivingly, what is being done to them, that's, hey, my happiness is 100% being threatened, and maybe I can see I'm not going to be happy anymore, or I haven't been for a long time, and they kind of just cut it off right there.
Well, it's interesting that you use the phrase boiling point, because that's exactly the kind of imagery that obligers use. That they talk about lids being blown off of pots, volcanoes erupting, balloons bursting under pressure. But the thing about it is that it is not a controlled resistance. It's not like it's not like, let's sit down and talk about why I'm frustrated. It's like, I'm walking out of here, you're dead to me. And so there can be real negative costs to it because it's not controlled, and there can be reputational costs, because to other people it's very puzzling. It's like, well, if you had a problem with this, why didn't you say so? Why are you only telling us this now? If you didn't want to do it, why did you say you would do it? Like, other people don't understand what's going on. So it's very important for obligers to be paying attention to when that they feel like they're reaching that boiling point, and to try to figure out ways to intervene. And for other people to say, like, even if somebody says, oh, it's fine for me to be on 7 committees and everybody else is only on 1 committee, or it's fine for me to do all this onerous work travel and nobody else is doing their work travel, or it's fine for me to be doing these extra shifts and nobody else is doing extra shifts, that's not fair. And you need to step in as a coworker, as a family member, as a sweetheart, as a boss, and say, what's going on here? Because it looks to me like someone's being taken advantage of, and or isn't giving themselves enough respite. So you might say, like, look, you're a very valuable member of this team, and I'm looking at the calendar and I see you haven't taken a vacation in 18 months. We can't have you burn out. I want you to come in by the end of the week and tell me, when are you going to take some vacation? And I want to hear what that plan is. I'm going to hold you accountable for taking a break, because an obliger often needs accountability, even for things like goofing off, taking a break. Often when they talk about self-care, I'm like, you need accountability for self-care. If you need, if you want to exercise, you need to work out with a trainer or take a class or whatever. You can't just like make it a priority. That never works. Maybe it should work, and obligers wish it could work.
Yeah, I bet.
In my observation, it just doesn't work. Outer accountability is.
I was laughing earlier when you were saying, I'm fine. It reminds me of the scene in Friends when Ross is like, I'm fine. It's so obvious.
There's so many wise moments in Friends. Like when Chandler starts smoking and he's like, but I've been so good. That's why I haven't smoked in so long. That's why I deserve a cigarette now. I'm like, and that is the highway to hell.
That makes sense for you, not for me. Let me reward myself with the thing that I've been trying not to do for so long.
Paradoxical, and then for rebels, rebels are exciting to be with. They can do anything they want to do. They're very comfortable flouting convention. They're very in touch with their authentic selves and what they want. And there's a lot of energy and excitement that comes from that. That said, it can be very challenging to be with somebody in any relationship where if you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And I think, and it's funny because rebel is the tendency that the fewest people belong to, but it's the longest chapter in the book because I think it's the most different from the other three. And if you're dealing with a rebel, you really need to wrap your mind around how they see the world in a different way and how they're going to be reacting. Because a lot of things that work for other people, other tendencies don't work well, like to-do lists, monitoring, accountability, scheduling. These things often can be challenging for rebels to use, or they have to use it with it kind of from a rebel perspective.
It sounds really tricky.
It's easy to trip off the rebel spirit of resistance without even realizing that you're doing it. Something like, oh, you have to read this book, you'll love it. You can't tell me what to read. I hate it. You know what I mean? This is something that rebels will say.
You are setting off so many light bulbs of people in my life right now. That
Excellent. Good. Oh, I'd love to hear that. Excellent. Yes.
Yeah, so Gretchen, I know we've kind of had some hiccups in getting our technology squared away, and I want to be mindful of your time here. So in kind of summation, the final question I ask everybody is, you clearly have put a purpose to your passion. You have this longevity of human nature study and happiness, and then dissecting it even further into helping people realize which of these 4 categories they most likely or may fall into, to not only better understand themselves, but so that they can then understand better the people around them, which of course is just a great type of synergy. So that being said, with happiness, with the 4 tendencies, how does all of this, would you say, help someone live a life ever forward?
Well, I mean, I think the big question for all of us is how do we live the life we want? How do we live a happier, healthier, more creative, more productive life? And the fact is it's different for everyone. And it's interestingly, so I have a podcast, the Happier Podcast. I'm an upholder, my sister's an obliger. And one of the things that comes up all the time is we'll talk about things that would make us happier. But the way she goes about it would be very different from the way I would go about it. And we're sisters and we're incredibly close, but we're different people. Mm-hmm. And so, part of it comes down to this idea of self-knowledge. When it's the most ancient advice of all time. It's like on the temple of Apollo at Delphi. It's like the most tired, cliched
know thyself
thing to say. Yeah. Know thyself, because it's true. And it's like once you understand yourself, then you can set up things so you can move ever forward, because you're creating a life that reflects your interests, your values, your nature, your temperament. And that's going to be different for everyone. Because, Chase, you and I are both upholders, but we could be different in 100 other ways that would affect, like, if we wanted to exercise or eat right or write a novel in our free time or start a side hustle or whatever it would be, it might be very different. And so I think it's really through self-knowledge that we can create a life that's ever forward.
Amazing answer, Gretchen. Thank you so much. That really, I think, summarizes the mission here for Everforward Radio and all the content that that Everforward as a whole puts out. And it's all about putting products and services out there, bringing people together, being a platform for people who are already doing their thing, but also to help others find their thing and to find themselves in the whole process. That's awesome. Sure. So, Gretchen, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Where can my audience connect with you? Where are you hanging out most online these days?
Oh my gosh, I'm everywhere you want to go. I have a website called GretchenRubin.com where I have I write there almost every day. There's tons of resources. You could take the quiz there.
It's a really interactive website. Full disclosure to everybody, I hop back and forth on it from time to time, and you can spend a lot of time on there. Find a lot of great content. Yeah. Yeah,
well, thank you. Yeah, and I just did a big redesign, so it's even easier to find what you're looking for, I think. And I have a podcast called Happier with Gretchen Rubin, which is a weekly podcast
doing amazingly.
I do with my sister, and it's all about how to be happier. Spoiler alert. And then I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram under the name Gretchen Rubin, and I love to connect there. And I have a weekly Facebook Live show called Ask Gretchen Rubin Live, which is every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern.
Okay.
So for people who want to ask me a question about happiness, or even what's my dog's name or whatever, that's a way where you can connect live. But I'm all over every place, and I love to hear from listeners and readers and viewers, because in the study of human nature, I'm learning so much from what people tell, their insights, their examples, their questions. So I love to connect with people.
Oh, your engagement, I'm sure, is great in the sense that your audience can connect with you, but it's got to be subliminal research on your end.
Oh, subliminal,
really? Yeah.
nothing. It's like quite explicit. And if you look at the book, The Four Tendencies, it's crammed with examples from people from real life because because it came out in Better Than Before. Mm-hmm. People have been emailing me incessantly, and I had just these examples of like, oh, how did I get my rebel not to drop out of high school? And, how did I'm a doctor, and how am I using this to get my patients to take their blood pressure medication? Or, my wife was driving me crazy for years until finally I understood, like, this was the magic thing to say. So I've gained so much from audience engagement.
So great.
Absolutely.
So great deal. Again, thank you for coming on the podcast. I will link all of that information and her resources and where you can find Gretchen in the show notes below. Make sure you go out and get The Four Tendencies, Gretchen's latest book, and catch her online.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I'm so happy to get the chance to talk to you.
All right. Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you all so much for joining me again this week. I truly hope that you have enjoyed this episode and its message. If you have found value in Everforward Radio, I would greatly appreciate you subscribing to the podcast, as well as taking just a few seconds and leaving it a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. This is the best way to make sure our message continues to reach others. Thanks again, and I hope that this content helps you live a life ever forward.